I stepped off the train expecting the familiar smell of Mom's New Year's roast and the chaos of family laughter. Instead, the house was pitch black, freezing, and dead quiet. My mom, my sister, my entire family vanished. The only sound in the dark living room was my father's weak, rattling breath coming from the couch, his fever soaring, abandoned in the freezing cold. And resting right on his chest was a crisp, sealed envelope from my mother with 3 words written in sharp red ink: "Do not follow." Everyone thought I was just the quiet daughter who ran away to the city. But standing in that dark living room, holding my father's ice-cold hand, I realized a dark game had been played in my absence. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Clara, and at 28 years old, I thought I had my life mapped out. But standing in the foyer of my childhood home, everything fell apart. The front door had been unlocked. Inside, the house was freezing, wrapped in a heavy, unnatural silence. There were no festive lights glowing in the window, no smell of Mom's famous holiday roast, no music echoing down the hall. Just dark shadows and a cold breeze whistling through the corridor. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, my voice tight with sudden panic. No answer. I hurried into the living room, flipping the light switch. Nothing happened. The power was out. In the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through the window, I saw him. My father, Arthur, was sitting slumped in his favorite leather armchair. He looked terrifyingly frail, his face pale and hollowed by a sudden, aggressive illness I hadn't realized had gotten this bad. He was shivering under a thin blanket, staring blankly into the dark. "Dad." I rushed to my knees beside him, grabbing his freezing hands. "Dad, what's going on? Where's Mom?" He didn't speak. His eyes slowly shifted toward me, cloudy and disoriented. His fingers weakly uncurled, revealing a crumpled piece of cream stationery. I smoothed out the paper with trembling hands. It was my mother's handwriting, jagged and rushed. "If you are reading this, Clara, don't look for me. And don't tell your father what I've done." I stared at Mom's note while my heart hammered against my ribs. Her words made no sense, but Dad was my immediate priority. I wrapped him in 2 heavy wool blankets, brought him a cup of warm water, and made sure he was safe before turning the house upside down for answers. My mother, Eleanor, was the rock of our family. She was meticulous, steady, and fiercely devoted. She would never just walk out on my father, especially not in the middle of winter, and especially not with him this sick. Something was terribly wrong. I went straight to my parents' bedroom. The closet doors swung open, and that's when the first crack in our perfect picture appeared. Mom's clothes were all still hanging neatly, but her vanity drawers had been pulled out, completely cleared of any personal keepsakes. Beneath a pile of old linens on her nightstand, I found a hidden leather binder. I opened it, expecting a journal or address book. Instead, a waterfall of paper spilled across the floor. Dozens of unopened past-due medical bills. Final eviction notices. Urgent demands from collection agencies totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars. The dates went back 6 months, right around the time Dad's health began to decline. I sank onto the edge of the bed, breathless. Mom hadn't just been managing Dad's care. She had been quietly drowning under a mountain of debt, fighting an impossible financial war entirely alone, without letting a single soul know. My hands shook as I dialed my older brother, Julian. When he finally picked up, I could hear the background chatter of a loud party. "Julian, you need to come home right now." I breathed, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom is gone, Dad is sick in the dark, and there are stacks of unpaid bills everywhere. There was a long pause, followed by a heavy, bitter scoff. "Gone?" "Clara, open your eyes." Mom stole whatever savings Dad had left and ran off. She knew the house was sinking, so she abandoned ship. Before I could scream at him, the call ended. An hour later, headlights flashed across the driveway. Julian and his wife, Vanessa, marched into the cold house, but they weren't here to help. Julian immediately headed for Dad's desk, frantically pulling open drawers. "We need to find Dad's financial power of attorney. Julian said coldly, ignoring our shivering father. We have to sell this house before the bank takes it and put Dad into a cheap nursing facility. Are you insane? I stepped between him and the desk. Mom didn't steal anything. She was protecting us. She's a liar who ran away. Julian spat. Suddenly, a weak rasp broke our argument. Dad was leaning against the doorway, his eyes fixed on me with a sudden, startling lucidity. He reached out, his trembling hand touching my arm as he whispered, "The J Street Clinic, Clara, she went to save the clock." Save the clock? Julian sneered, shaking his head. He's senile, Clara. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Watch him, Julian. I snapped, grabbing my coat and car keys. Don't touch a single thing in this house until I get back. I sped into the night through the falling snow, my phone screen displaying the address for J Street. It was 20 minutes away, on the industrial edge of the city. My mind raced with Dad's cryptic words. Save the clock. Was it a metaphor? A code name? At 11 o'clock on New Year's Eve, J Street was practically abandoned. I pulled up to a sleek, modern concrete building with dark, tinted windows. The sign above the automatic doors read, Aegis Advanced Medical Research Center. My heart thundered against my ribs. This wasn't a bank or a pawn shop. It was an elite, private specialty clinic. I pushed through the heavy glass doors into a sterile, quiet lobby. A woman in dark scrubs sat behind the reception desk, looking up in surprise as I approached. Can I help you, miss? We're closed for public appointments tonight. My name is Clara Miller, I said, leaning over the counter, my voice trembling with desperate urgency. My mother is Eleanor Miller. She left a note, and my father sent me here. Please tell me why she came. The receptionist's polite smile vanished. Her expression instantly shifted into one of deep solemnity. She pulled up a file on her computer screen, typed for a moment, and then looked at me with profound pity. Your mother didn't abandon your family, Clara, the woman whispered softly. She enrolled in an experimental, high-risk living donor program to pay off your father's medical debts and fund his emergency treatment. The procedure started an hour ago. The receptionist's words hung in the sterile air, cold and heavy. Eleanor hadn't run away. She hadn't stolen a single cent. She had offered her own body to a high-risk experimental medical program just to secure the funds to keep Dad alive. Don't look for me. And don't tell your father what I've done. Her note wasn't a confession of guilt or abandonment. It was a terrifying, quiet farewell written by a woman who knew she might not survive the operating table tonight. While Julian and I had been judging her, while the world fell apart around our family, Mom was waging the ultimate battle of love completely alone. Where is she? I choked out, tears finally streaming down my face. Where is the surgery happening? St. Jude's Hospital, 3 miles south, the receptionist replied urgently. They brought her to their surgical wing at 10. I didn't waste another second. I sprinted back out into the freezing snow, my engine roaring as I raced down the deserted city streets. The clock on my dashboard read 11:35 p.m. Time was running out. While Julian was back at the house preparing to dismantle our family home for profit, my mother was fighting for her life under a surgeon's scalpel. I burst through the doors of St. Jude's emergency department, my boots sliding on the polished floors. I demanded answers at the desk, pacing back and forth in the sterile waiting room, while the seconds ticked away. At 11:48 p.m., the double doors finally swung open. A doctor stepped out, leading a rolling bed. There sat my mother, pale, attached to glowing monitors, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes open. When she saw me, her lips trembled. Clara, she whispered weakly, reaching out a fragile hand. Is Arthur okay? I squeezed Mom's cold hand, assuring her that Dad was safe, before leaving her in the care of the nurses and driving back to the house like a woman possessed. It was 11:55 p.m. when I slammed the front door open. Julian was in Dad's study, holding a stack of property deeds, while Dad sat in the chair, silent tears running down his weathered cheeks. Put those down, Julian, I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy air. Julian turned, an arrogant smirk on his face. You're too late, Clara. I'm taking control of the estate before the banks repossess everything. Mom ruined us. Mom didn't ruin us, I said, stepping closer, my voice terrifyingly calm. Mom is lying in a hospital bed right now after undergoing a high-risk medical procedure. She traded her own health to clear Dad's medical bills and fund his life-saving treatment. Julian's face went completely blank. What? She sacrificed everything while you sat back, accusing her of being a thief. I continued, pointing a trembling finger at him. You didn't care about Dad. You just wanted to strip his life's work down for cash before anyone else could. Dad slowly stood up from his chair. The disoriented fog in his eyes was completely gone, replaced by a fierce, protective fire. He walked toward Julian, grabbed the deeds out of his hands, and tore them in half. Get out of my house, Dad said, his voice echoing with a strength I hadn't heard in years. Clara is in charge now. You are no longer my son. Julian and Vanessa stared in stunned horror. Without another word, they turned and fled into the freezing night, leaving behind the wreckage of their own greed. As the distant sound of fireworks began to echo across the city, signaling the arrival of midnight, I helped Dad into the car and drove him straight to St. Jude's Hospital. When we walked into the recovery room, Mom looked up, her tired eyes suddenly lighting up with overwhelming tears. Dad rushed to her side, wrapping his shaking arms around her, kissing her hands over and over again. The house we had left behind wasn't empty anymore. Its warmth had simply moved into this small, quiet room where two people who loved each other beyond measure were finally reunited. Standing there watching them, I realized that true love isn't quiet, easy, or loud. It's measured by the silent sacrifices we make when everything else falls apart. If my family story touched your heart today, please leave a comment down below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, dramatic stories. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.